And we're live. Welcome, everybody. Yet another weekly call for the new diffs architecture design workflow. We have one entry for now in the agenda. Patrick, he wants to thank Carrie for creating that issue to investigate alternative solutions for syntax highlighting. She started very good questions as threads, and he has left initial thoughts on it that may help the investigation. Please feel free to share yours as well. I haven't caught up yet. Does anybody here has any thoughts on this topic?
I left the answers as well, so I think we can continue the discussion asynchronously on this topic. Thank you, Patrick and Carrie, for the discussion there.
Okay. I think it's interesting to get to the bottom of these questions, especially as we're considering other ways of getting that information and prioritizing, using different priorities, especially once we're loading the initial or prioritized files or changed paths. We could make those come highlighted already, but then the rest of them could come non-highlighted, and then we can defer that to a later point in time based on user interaction, which would be really good if that is in fact affecting the time that it would get us there.
And even if it turns out, oh, sorry, Andre.
Go ahead. No, that was it.
Even if it turns out like this is like, a red herring or a blind alley, just taking a few minutes to document our thoughts or, the state of the tech today, that can be important for the process as an artifact.
For sure, it will indeed. There is an open question in my mind that I'm not sure if we've already addressed, and especially in what languages or technologies offer a superior performance, is that when we were working with code intelligence implementation, we were using a specific file format to giving that information to the front end, or I think that the LSF files. So the question here is whether there's any way to get the highlighting information to the front end without having to parrot the content of the files. If there's any way to send an annotated version of the syntax highlighted information, we could have the front end highlight the content it already knows. Yeah, just something. I'll add my thoughts there, and I think that's the best way. Make sure that we keep the discussion with the relevant information. So, since we didn't have an agenda, I was brainstorming, and we can have a better use of our time. Anything else on this point that anybody wants to raise? Right, so let's continue discussion asynchronous. Apart from that, anything else that people have on their minds, questions, thoughts, things we should look into?
I'll just give a small update that I'm still documenting all the features that we have. So I'm basically splitting this into two dimensions. One dimension is the type of the div that we have. It can be a code div, image div, file div, or just like a changed path div. And also another dimension is which technology we are using. So is it merge request diffs, which are using view files, or is it HAML template? Because the feature sets are a little bit different there. For example, the HAML version has a toggle where you can switch between highlighted and raw file, which we don't have in the diffs. So, doing that.
Can you add a link to the issue? I know we have an issue for it. I just can't find it at the moment. In the agenda.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. That's definitely worthwhile. So thanks for doing that. The other thing, I think we still have several open issues to take care of, stuff like the definition of done and everything. So I know this, or at least for me as a manager, this is a busy week for because of assessments and everything. But it would be nice to get some movement there on getting those issues closed by committing those changes to the documentation. And remember, we can always iterate, we can always add more information later if we need to. Okay, Justin, have a point.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of give an update on our end. The Italy side, we're going to start moving forward with the changes we discussed last week for supporting paginated diffs. So it's kind of a re-architecture of our diff service. So if anyone has any other feedback, they can put it in that issue. But I think we're going to start moving forward and implementing and just kind of seeing what it's going to look like and iterating on that.
Thanks, Justin. And just for clarity, it will be, and you won't change any existing RPC, it will create new ones, is that it?
Yes, correct. Yeah, so we're going to leave everything as is, and then we're going to add in 2 new RPCs. One that's kind of that fetches information about what the diff is, going to the shape of the diff, and then the other one to actually diff blobs that the client would call in succession. And we are exploring, because this was mentioned last week too, about potentially batching series of files, like batches of files. We are exploring that. That will require upstream changes. So that might be an additional RPC in the future as an optimization we can make.
That's definitely interesting. Just so I'm clear as well, for this to have an impact in the product, the code base needs to get updated to use the new RPCs. Are we the only ones leveraging these, or will other parts of the product leverage these as well?
There is a couple other small areas that are using the existing commit diff RPC, if I remember correctly. But definitely, yeah, I believe y'all are the main use case for this RPC. So ideally, we'd want to convert over at some point. And maybe potentially eventually move everyone over and phase out the old one. We'll see. Just the existing one does not scale well with the shape of the repository as it gets larger.
Okay. I think it's important to discuss this a little bit here because the time frame for this effort, what we were anticipating is having the blueprint published in the Q4 and then having some sort of implementation kickoff within Q1. Which does not preclude us from exploring integrating these improvements in the code base before that. If it definitely gets the benefits, this would be implementation between Rails and Gitly. But if we think that time is better invested in building the new diffs in Q1, then we'll have a discussion at that moment. But I think it's important to keep us in the loop of what's happening. I don't know how long this will take, if it's a milestone work or, like you said, the upstream changes will take a little bit longer. But keep us posted, and then we'll adjust and we'll talk about prioritizing any adjustments.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. Any more points?
Just a quick question about the Gitly implementation. Yeah, do we have a vision already? The idea of how do we want to implement it, or is it still being discussed?
We have a pretty good idea of how we want to implement it. There's already, I'm trying to remember what the name of the RPC that's kind of similar for the first part. Basically, you're going to call, the client would call Gitly and get a summary of all the changes that are going to happen, like all the file paths with their associated blob before and after for the diff. Yeah. And then with that information, then the client would sequentially call or just follow up with calls for a diff blobs RPC and provide the before and after blob. And then it would just return a diff per file, basically. And that allows us to scale better, not have to do a one, because on even though it kind of looks like it's commit diffs is paginated today, really on the back end, there's a single Git process that gets spawned and computes the whole diff and then just chunks it back to the client. And the problem is if that one Git process takes too long or is too expensive, the whole thing times out. It just doesn't scale. And there's already example repositories that are causing timeouts, and we're finding people have to increase their timeouts to avoid this issue. So
yeah, I agree. And just for clarification, is it 2 RPCs or like the single, the first one you mentioned? Yeah, it's like metadata, yeah, or something like this, and then actual data, yeah.
yes, correct. It would be 2 separate RPCs. One that's like I said, kind of gives the summary, and then the second one, it would be like diff blobs would probably be the name of it, and just for each blob.
Yeah. And metadata RPC, can it be paginated as well? I mean,
yes.
I can imagine that, yeah, we can also have like a huge list of files. Yes, so we should apply pagination on pagination, right?
Yeah, we could stream back lists of the actual metadata that's for the diff. Yeah, we would paginate that as well.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you very much for explanation.
I think it's pretty interesting because when you say metadata, initial metadata, we have encountered some edge cases when working in the merge request diffs. And one of them, I'll mention 2. One of them was when, with renames, where the file path might not be as unique as we think, because in the course of a merge request, you can have multiple changes that end up deleting a file, moving a different file to that path again. And I don't know how Git resolves that. I know that there was an incident where an instance where we had a collision of file paths, but different operations on those files. I can't remember exactly what the scenario was. So that was one. And the other is that we already split the data into 2 requests to the backend on the merge requests. One is for diffs metadata, and that diffs metadata, I think it's like interesting because I don't know if it will match what we're getting from Gitly, but a lot of it we use to compile or just generate the statistics here on the top, the counts of files and all that stuff. We use that diffs metadata to generate the file tree here on the left. And this is the information that comes through the diffs metadata endpoint. Again, this is not a public API. This is just an internal thing we're using at the moment, but it does allow us to start rendering the UI for the diff, right? It doesn't have the lines, just the information of each files. Is this something what you're looking to implement, Justin, or similar?
Probably. I think it's going to be a variation of this RPC, because there's the line numbers, the added line numbers, and deleted line numbers. That's another RPC. I think it's like diff stats or something like that. And basically, but yes, we want to do an extension of the RPC that presents this information. I can't remember the name right now, but I think this RPC doesn't do rename detection right now, and we need to extend it to do rename detection. Just to clarify one thing that you mentioned earlier, did you say that you guys also do additional like modification of the diffs to determine rename detection on your end, or
that's a good question.
Okay.
I don't know what we do, because
I hope we don't. Yeah.
Igor?
I hope we don't, yeah, because it would be like not memory, like resource consuming information, I think. So I hope we don't do it like this. Yeah.
I don't know. Carrie, do you know if we do anything after we get the information from Gitly for renaming? Well, we need to look into that.
I don't. I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Yes, I'll repeat. Do we do anything to the data we get from Gitly to detect renaming and like file clashes and stuff like that? Because we mentioned before, I think Thomas worked on something about renamed files. The mode of operation that were being done to those files was slightly different. I can't remember exactly the scenario, but the question then is, do we just get the information from Gitly and present it to the front end, or do we do some operations to detect special cases?
I don't recall us doing anything on our side, on the Rails side. Not to say that we don't,
look,
I don't recall
and
that.
then
Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah,
Because then that could be useful for testing.
Probably some additional like conditions were involved, something like binary data, something like this. I also remember something like that Thomas investigated something like this, but yeah, also don't remember the details. And regarding the diffs metadata, I've noticed that we cache a lot. Yeah, when I see in the performance bar, diffs metadata doesn't perform any gitly calls, and we probably like cache it and then like do it using SQL calls. And but at the same time, when I compare with another version, yeah, I see a gitly call, but it diffstats. And as far as I remember, diffstats returns file names or something like this, or maybe not, but.
Yeah, and probably still makes sense to have a separate RPC for just the diff stats for sure, because you might want to get the blobs, but not render that particular part of the UI. Yeah, so yeah. Cool. I just wanted to raise it just in case that wasn't known, because it's not a public API. It's just something that we internally use for the merge requests. Again, doesn't mean that the new diffs will follow the same approach. Might be slightly different because it needs to account for other cases. All right. Thanks for looking into that. Anything else you want to talk about? There's still the topic of the timing of the APAC call, that it seems like it didn't happen last week as well. But I have some ideas. So my idea is to potentially oscillate between, I'll add a point to the agenda discussing timing of the APAC call. Instead of oscillating between now and a very much later time, come up with some alternate time where it's a bit closer for all of us to participate in Europe, but include Patrick, which would be a bit earlier, even if that excludes Carrie every other week. But I feel like we have a very highly engaged member that is not being able to make the sync calls, and that worries me a little bit. So I know that we are doing a good job keeping things asynchronously going, but and I thank everybody for the patience, but I'll discuss it on Slack again, try to come up with a better timing to oscillate between. Thanks for the thumbs up, Carrie. I saw that. Cool. Any other thoughts, questions? If not, I can give you some time back. All right, that's a thumbs up. Thank you so much, and see you around on another call.